The vastness of the galaxy was both beautiful and terrifying. From the outer rim to the center, it was filled with countless stars, planets, and life forms. Some worlds were thriving, others dying. And humanity, just a young species compared to the ancient civilizations around them, was still trying to find its place in this grand cosmos. They had been welcomed cautiously into the galactic community, with most alien species keeping a wary eye on them. They didn't trust humans fully, not yet. The Earth was still a mystery, its people known for their unpredictable ways, their fiery determination, and their unwavering belief in their right to survive and thrive. But now, something was happening that even the galaxy's most powerful civilizations couldn't ignore. The Krill, a peaceful race of beings with incredible technology. The Krill had been one of the first species to offer their knowledge and help to humanity. They had shared secrets of space travel, medicine, and even advanced energy sources. Many considered them to be one of the most enlightened races in the galaxy, respected and admired by those who had the privilege of working with them. And now, the Krill were dying. Captain Amelia Hayes of the United Earth Defense Force, UEDF, stared at the flickering distress signal that had come through just hours ago. The message was garbled, but the meaning was clear. The Krill were facing a plague. Something new, something terrible. And the worst part, the rest of the galaxy had turned their backs on them. It was as if the Krill's ancient allies were just leaving them to face it alone. Hayes ran a hand through her dark hair, her eyes fixed on the screen as it blinked a second time with a fresh message. The Krill weren't just asking for help. They were begging for it. Their cities were falling apart. Entire populations were being wiped out. And yet, the Galactic Council, the self-proclaimed leaders of the galaxy, had refused to send aid. Why? Captain Hayes muttered to herself, the question hanging in the air. The Krill had always been generous, always stood by the side of those who needed help. But now, in their time of need, the galaxy had ignored them. Was it a political decision? Fear of what might happen if the Krill survived and became too strong again? Or was it something more sinister? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She turned, and Lieutenant Mark Ryan stepped into the room. Captain, we've reviewed the message. It's real. The Krill are in trouble. They need us. His voice was serious, his face grim. I know, Hayes replied, nodding. She stood up from her desk, pacing the room, her mind racing. But why hasn't anyone else helped? The Galactic Council should be stepping in. This isn't just a political issue. It's a humanitarian crisis. We can't change what the galaxy's decided, but we can do something. We can help them, Ryan said, his words calm but filled with purpose. Hayes stopped pacing and looked out the large window of her office. Outside, the stars seemed to stretch endlessly into the void, and the sight reminded her of how small they all were in the grand scheme of things. Yet the fate of the Krill now lay in her hands. We can't just sit here and wait for permission. We have to act. I'll make the call. The decision was made. Hayes immediately sent a secure message to UEDF Command, requesting approval to travel to Krillon, the Krill homeworld. The Earth military was not supposed to get involved in galactic politics, especially not when it meant defying the wishes of the Council. But the Krill weren't just any alien race. They were humanity's allies. And the humans, unlike the rest of the galaxy, had a simple code: protect those who cannot protect themselves. Minutes later, her screen flickered with a response from High Command. Permission granted. You leave at once, Captain. But be aware, this decision is unprecedented. I don't care, Hayes replied, her voice firm. Prepare the fleet. We leave within the hour. As Hayes made her preparations, she gathered her team. A mix of soldiers, scientists, and diplomats, ready to face whatever awaited them. They all understood the risk. The galaxy had made it clear they were not welcome. But the humans weren't afraid. They had faced challenges before, and they had always overcome them. This time would be no different. As the fleet began to move toward Krillon, Hayes looked out the view screen, watching as stars blurred into streaks of light. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, but there was no turning back now. Humanity had chosen its side. They would defend the Krill, even if it meant standing against the entire galaxy. They would fight for those who had been abandoned, and the galaxy would soon learn that when humanity chose to act, nothing, and no one, could stop them. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before them as Captain Amelia Hayes stood at the front of the UEDF flagship Endurance. The ship's powerful engines hummed quietly, its sleek design cutting through the darkness of the galaxy. Her team was ready, a crew of highly trained soldiers, doctors, and engineers, all loyal to the mission. But as the Krill homeworld of Krillon loomed closer, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the unknown. Her first officer, Lieutenant Mark Ryan, approached her with a small tablet in hand. "Captain, the Krillon system is just ahead. No signs of enemy ships in the area. But we're not the only ones watching." Hayes glanced at the data. The system was quiet, almost too quiet. The stars around Krillon seemed to blink out, as if the galaxy itself had abandoned this corner of space. The Krill had been isolated for months now, ever since the plague began ravaging their world. No ships had come to their aid. No fleets had arrived to help fight back the disease that had turned their beautiful cities into graveyards. But the silence was broken by a transmission. "Unidentified Earth vessel. This is the Krill High Command. We have detected your approach. Please be advised, we can no longer guarantee your safety. The situation has worsened beyond our ability to contain it." The voice was weak but urgent. Hayes could hear the strain in it. These were the Krill, their leaders, the ones who had once been the galaxy's guiding lights, now reduced to desperate survivors pleading for help. "Understood," Captain Hayes replied firmly, her voice strong even though her heart was heavy. "We'll be landing shortly. Prepare for assistance." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge silent once more. Lieutenant Ryan gave her a concerned look. "Are you sure about this, Captain? The Krill are known to be incredibly advanced, but this plague, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. The other races are afraid of it." Hayes met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and uncertainty. "They're afraid because they don't understand it, but we do. We're humans, Mark. We find a way. We don't leave people behind." Ryan nodded, though there was an unspoken worry in his eyes. No one knew the true nature of the plague. The Krill had kept the details hidden from the rest of the galaxy. But from what little they knew, the disease seemed to defy all known treatments. No matter how advanced the medicine, it couldn't stop the spread. As Endurance entered the atmosphere of Krillon, Hayes watched the surface through the ship's window. The once vibrant planet now appeared as a shadow of itself. Its lush green forests were now brown, and the cities, once shining monuments to Krill civilization, were in ruins. Smoke rose from the crumbled remains of skyscrapers. It was clear that the plague had not just infected the Krill, it had infected the land itself. The landing was smooth, but the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The moment they stepped off the ship, Hayes could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She led her team out onto the planet's surface, their boots crunching against the dirt and ash that had once been fertile soil. A small group of Krill waited for them near a shattered monument to their lost history. Their bodies were thin, their faces pale and tired. They looked at the humans with a mixture of hope and fear, uncertain whether help would come in time. Captain Hayes, one of the Krill leaders, a tall, gaunt figure named Kalen, greeted her with a shaky voice. "We are grateful that you came, but I must warn you, the plague, it is unlike anything you have seen." Hayes nodded. "We know. We'll do everything we can." Kalen lowered his head. "The disease is not just a plague. It is a weapon created by someone who wishes to see us gone." A chill ran down Hayes' spine. This was no natural disaster. Someone had done this on purpose. Do you have any idea who could be behind it? Hayes asked, her voice calm but tense. We have our suspicions, Callan replied, his voice filled with dread. But no proof. All we know is that the disease is spreading fast, and soon our people will be lost. You are our last hope, Captain. For a moment, there was silence. The wind carried the scent of decay, and the sky overhead seemed darker than it should have been. Hayes turned to her team, signaling them to get to work. They needed to find the source of the plague and fast. As they set up their mobile labs and began gathering samples, Hayes felt the weight of the galaxy's abandonment on her shoulders. She had chosen to come here, to save a race that the rest of the galaxy had written off as doomed. But the danger was clear now. If the disease was indeed a weapon, it meant that there were those out there who wanted not just the Krill gone, but the humans as well. And they were about to discover just how far humanity was willing to go to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The mission had just begun, but already the tension in the air was thick. Every step they took, every decision they made, would determine whether the Krill would live or die, and whether humanity's place in the galaxy would be solidified or erased forever. The day after their arrival on Krillon, Captain Hayes and her team were fully immersed in the mission. The mobile labs they had set up in the ruined city were buzzing with activity. Doctors, engineers, and scientists worked together in a race against time, gathering samples from the Krill population and the environment around them. Captain Hayes stood with Lieutenant Ryan, watching as the last pieces of their equipment were unloaded. The team had made it clear that the situation was worse than anyone had imagined. The plague wasn't just killing the Krill, it was changing them. Bodies that had once been filled with vitality were now skeletal, their skin turning a sickly shade of gray. Some of the infected had already lost their minds, wandering the streets in confusion, their eyes empty of recognition. It's like they're becoming something else, Ryan said, his voice full of concern. The plague is more than just a disease. It's rewriting their biology. Hayes nodded. We need to understand why. If we can figure out the cause, maybe we can stop it. In the lab, Dr. Alia Green, one of Earth's top virologists, was studying the samples they had collected from infected Krill. Her face was tense, her focus unwavering. She had been working non-stop since they landed, analyzing every piece of data she could gather. Alia, Captain Hayes called, walking over to her. What have you found? Dr. Green looked up, her eyes tired but determined. I've run tests on the blood samples. There's something in their genetic makeup, something foreign. It's not just a virus or a bacteria. It's like an engineered pathogen. It's been designed to target their very cells, their DNA. Engineered? Hayes asked, feeling a chill run through her. You mean someone made this? Dr. Green nodded. Yes, and it's unlike anything we've seen before. It's adapting, evolving, faster than we can keep up with. The Krill are being attacked on a cellular level, and it's spreading rapidly. But that's not all. What else? Hayes pressed. The pathogen is also affecting the environment. The air, the water, even the soil, everything is contaminated. It's not just a plague. It's a weapon, designed to wipe out an entire ecosystem. Hayes took a deep breath, absorbing the weight of the information. The Krill were being deliberately destroyed, and it was clear that whoever was behind this attack had no intention of leaving anything behind. Do we know who did this? Ryan asked, his voice full of quiet anger. We don't have proof yet, Dr. Green replied. But the patterns suggest that this isn't just an accident. Someone wanted the Krill to suffer. Who would do this? Hayes asked, her mind racing. The Krill had been allies to so many in the galaxy. They had helped countless races advance, offering knowledge, technology, and compassion. Why would anyone want them gone? I'll keep running tests, Dr. Green said, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. Hayes looked at her team, all of them working tirelessly, and felt a surge of determination. They weren't going to stop. They couldn't. They had made a promise to the Krill, And now, more than ever, that promise mattered. "I need a team to work on the cure," Hayes said, turning to her senior medical officer, Dr. Michael Stokes. "Can we develop something based on what we've learned so far?" Dr. Stokes looked over his shoulder at the screens, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's possible, Captain. If we can isolate the pathogen's weak points, we might be able to create a treatment. But it's going to take time. We need a base, a place to develop the cure without the constant threat of the disease spreading further." "Time is something we don't have," Hayes replied, her voice sharp with urgency. "We'll need to create a safe zone here. We can't risk bringing this back to Earth." As they made their plans, the reality of the situation grew clearer. Not only was the Krill race fighting for survival, but humanity was now in the crosshairs. Whoever had created this weapon had already proven they would stop at nothing to achieve their goal. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. In the meantime, the UEDF soldiers stationed on Krillon had begun patrolling the area around the city. They had seen no signs of enemy ships, but the calm was unsettling. The lack of outside interference raised a troubling question. Why weren't the galactic powers intervening? Were they watching, waiting for humanity to fail? Hayes couldn't trust anyone in the galaxy right now, not after what she had seen. Back in the lab, a breakthrough came. Dr. Green called out to Captain Hayes, her voice filled with a rare spark of excitement. "I've isolated a pattern in the pathogen's genetic structure. It's a long shot, but we might be able to create a synthetic antibody to counteract the disease." Hayes rushed over, her heart pounding with hope. If they could make the cure, they could save the Krill. But the thought of what would happen if they failed, if the Krill were lost forever, weighed heavily on her mind. "We're not going to fail," Hayes said, more to herself than to anyone else. "We're not leaving until this is done." In that moment, something inside her solidified. The rest of the galaxy had abandoned the Krill, but humanity was different. They would fight for the Krill, for the innocent lives caught in the middle, and for the hope that no one, not even an entire galaxy, could take away their will to stand for what was right. The following days on Krillon passed in a blur of frantic activity. Captain Hayes and her team worked around the clock, analyzing data, developing treatments, and searching for any clue that might explain the true origin of the plague. But despite their efforts, the disease continued to spread, slowly but relentlessly. The Krill, once a proud and thriving race, were becoming shadows of themselves. Each day, more of their people fell to the sickness. Some lost their ability to speak, others their ability to move. Those who had been infected the longest had already succumbed to a deep, almost catatonic state, their minds lost to the disease. Captain Hayes felt the weight of it all. The burden of hope, the burden of responsibility. She had come to save the Krill, but every passing hour seemed to make that goal feel more and more distant. "Captain, we've got a problem." Lieutenant Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts. He had just entered the command center, his face grim. Hayes looked up from the data screen. "What is it?" Ryan hesitated for a moment before answering. "The other galactic races, they're starting to move. It's subtle, but we're seeing increased patrols in this sector. The Krill are being washed, and I don't think it's for their protection." Hayes frowned. She had suspected as much. The galaxy had turned its back on the Krill, but now it seemed as though someone was making sure no one interfered with the consequences of their abandonment. "Who's behind it?" Hayes asked, her voice low. "We don't know for sure," Ryan replied, but the movement patterns seemed to suggest the Zoreth Collective. They're known for their secrecy and for dealing with delicate matters like this. The Zoreth Collective. Hayes had heard of them. They were a shadowy organization, known for their intelligence networks and their involvement in anything that could affect the balance of power in the galaxy. If they were involved, it meant something much more dangerous was at play. "We need to know what they're planning," Hayes said, her tone hardening. "If they're behind this, it's no longer just about saving the Krill. This is about stopping whatever they're trying to do." Ryan nodded. "I'll increase the surveillance. But Captain, we don't know how far this goes. The Zorath don't play by the rules. Hayes felt a surge of frustration. They were on their own. The Galactic Council had abandoned the Krill, and now it seemed as though their enemies were closing in, ensuring that no one interfered. They were trapped in a web of secrecy and danger. But Hayes wouldn't back down. Not now. I don't care what the Zorath think they can control, she said, her voice filled with resolve. We're not leaving. Not until we stop this plague and uncover the truth. In the lab, Dr. Green had made a breakthrough of her own. Captain, we've isolated the main compound responsible for the pathogen spread, she reported, her voice full of excitement. If we can synthesize a counteragent, we might have a chance of reversing the damage. That's great news, Alia, Hayes said, feeling a flicker of hope. How long until it's ready? It's not as simple as we'd hoped, Dr. Green replied, her face pale with exhaustion. The compound is incredibly volatile. We need time to stabilize it. Otherwise, it could make things worse. Time is what we don't have, Hayes muttered, rubbing her forehead. Every day, more krill were lost to the plague, and the clock was ticking. But despite the mounting pressure, the team pressed on. The researchers, the doctors, and even the soldiers who had come to Krillon, all were committed to the task. There was no turning back. As the days wore on, Hayes began to notice something strange. It wasn't just the disease that was spreading. The atmosphere on Krillon itself seemed to change. The once bright skies had turned darker, and an eerie silence now filled the air. The usual sounds of birds and wildlife were absent. It was as though the entire planet was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. One evening, as Hayes sat alone in her quarters, trying to organize her thoughts, the communications officer interrupted her. Captain, you need to see this, the officer said urgently. We've intercepted a transmission. It's from the Zorath Collective. Hayes' heart skipped a beat. She had known it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Patch it through, she ordered. The screen flickered to life, and a figure appeared. A shadowy figure, their face obscured by a mask. The voice was distorted, but the message was clear. Humanity. The voice began, cold and calculating. You've made a mistake. The Krill were never meant to survive. They were an experiment, and now they're failing. Your interference will not be tolerated. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Hayes staring at the empty screen. Her mind raced. This wasn't just about the plague. The Krill were part of something much larger, something the Zorath had engineered. This is bigger than we thought, Hayes muttered, her fists clenched. They knew the Krill would fail. And they set it in motion. Ryan entered the room, his face drawn with worry. What did they say? They confirmed it, Hayes replied, her voice filled with determination. The plague. It was no accident. The Krill were never supposed to survive. Ryan's expression hardened. Then we need to stop them. Before it's too late. Hayes nodded. The stakes had just been raised. What had begun as a mission to save a race from an unknown disease had now turned into a fight for survival. Not just for the Krill, but for humanity itself. The Zorath Collective had made a deadly move, and it was time to put an end to it. They would stop this, or they would face the consequences. The atmosphere on Krillon had shifted. What was once a planet full of vibrant life had become a place of uncertainty and danger. Captain Hayes could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. The Zorath Collective had made their threat clear. Humanity's involvement in the Krill crisis would not be tolerated. But Hayes wasn't backing down. She had made a promise to the Krill, and she would do whatever it took to keep it. The next morning, Hayes stood on the Bridge of Endurance, staring out at the ruined world below. The team had worked relentlessly to understand the plague and develop a cure, but time was running out. The Krill were dying faster than anyone had anticipated, and now there was the looming threat of the Zorath Collective interfering with their mission. We've got a situation. Lieutenant Ryan's voice broke the silence, his tone urgent. Hayes turned to face him. What is it, Ryan? The Zoreth Collective, Ryan continued, tapping a few buttons on his console. They've increased their presence in this sector. They've also activated a cloaked station just outside the Krillon system. It's clearly a forward command post. They're watching us, Hayes said, her voice low and firm. They want to make sure we don't succeed. Exactly, Ryan replied. We need to act quickly, or we'll be out of time. The longer they stay undetected, the harder it'll be to stop them. Hayes clenched her fists. She had always known that the Zoreth Collective wouldn't sit idly by. But now they were moving against them openly. The stakes had just risen higher than ever. We're going after that station, Hayes said, her voice unwavering. We can't let them control the situation any longer. Ryan's eyes widened. Captain, that's a dangerous move. We don't know what kind of defenses they've set up, and if we're wrong about their position. We don't have a choice, Hayes interrupted. The Krill are dying, and the longer we wait, the more of them we lose. We can't just sit back and let the Zoreth finish what they started. Ryan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Understood. I'll prepare the team. As Hayes left the bridge to brief the crew, her mind raced. The Zoreth Collective was known for its secrecy and ruthless tactics. They had a reputation for erasing anyone who got in their way. And now, humanity was standing in their path. The question was, why had they chosen to target the Krill? What was their true plan, and what role did the Krill play in it? Back in the command center, the atmosphere was tense. Soldiers, engineers, and scientists gathered around, preparing for the mission. They had already made great strides in synthesizing the cure, but they knew that if they didn't deal with the Zoreth Collective now, everything they had worked for could be in vain. We'll be infiltrating the Zoreth station, Hayes said, addressing the group. This is going to be dangerous, but we can't afford to wait any longer. We need to understand what the Zoreth are up to and put a stop to it. Our mission is twofold: stop the spread of the plague and uncover the truth behind it. There was a murmur of agreement from the crew. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation. This was no longer just about saving the Krill. It was about protecting everything humanity had worked for. Hayes turned to Dr. Green, who had been tirelessly working on the cure. Alia, how close are we to having something we can deploy? We have a formula, Dr. Green replied. It's still unstable, but with the right conditions, it could neutralize the pathogen. However, we need to find a way to mass produce it quickly if we're going to make any kind of impact. Hayes nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. We'll need to secure the Zoreth station. Once we do, we can work on distributing the cure. After the briefing, the team suited up and prepared for the mission. As the crew boarded Endurance and made their way toward the Zoreth station, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. The Zoreth were too quiet, too careful. They had made their presence known just enough to push them into action, but Hayes suspected they were being watched every step of the way. Captain, Lieutenant Ryan said, coming up beside her on the bridge, if they're expecting us, we might be walking into a heavily fortified position. I know, Hayes said, her voice steady, but it's a risk we have to take. The Krill are dying, and if we don't do something, we'll lose them forever. Ryan glanced at her, then nodded. We're with you, Captain. The ship cut through space, approaching the cloaked Zoreth station. It was an eerie sight, a dark silhouette against the stars, almost invisible to the naked eye. The Zoreth had clearly gone to great lengths to keep their presence a secret, but their cloaking technology wasn't perfect. It was only a matter of time before they would detect Endurance. We're almost there, Ryan said, his voice tight. They're beginning to scramble our sensors. We'll need to disable their defenses before we can dock. Hayes gave him a sharp nod. Get ready, everyone. This is going to get intense. As Endurance neared the station, a series of flashing red lights signaled that their presence had been detected. Hayes watched as the station's defenses powered up, energy shields glowing bright. They were running out of time. "We're going in now," Hayes said. "Prepare for impact." The battle to reach the station had begun. The moment Endurance entered the Zorath station's vicinity, chaos erupted. Captain Hayes had expected resistance, but nothing could have prepared her for the speed with which the Zorath reacted. The station's energy shields flared to life, and within seconds, beams of energy shot out toward them, forcing the crew to quickly adjust course. "Brace for impact," Hayes shouted, gripping the control panel as the ship jolted. The shields held for the moment, but the Zorath were clearly not playing around. "We're being targeted by multiple turrets," Lieutenant Ryan reported, his voice calm but tense. "I'm diverting all power to the shields. We can't take another hit like that." "Do what you can," Hayes ordered, her eyes scanning the readouts on the screen. "We need to dock. If we don't, this whole mission is over." A sudden tremor rocked the ship, and the warning lights flickered briefly. "Shields at 45%, Ryan announced, sweat beading on his forehead. "The Zorath are hitting us harder than we anticipated." "Captain," Dr. Green's voice came through from the back, sounding strained. "The cure formula. It's not stable enough to deploy under these conditions. If we don't neutralize their defenses, we'll lose the chance to save the krill." Hayes felt her heart race. The cure was their only hope, and if they couldn't deliver it, they would have failed the krill. "We don't have a choice. We push forward." The station loomed larger in the viewports, its black surface gleaming in the starry void. The Zorath Collective had built a fortress here, a place where their dark secrets and ruthless plans had been put into motion. "We're closing in," Ryan said, tension in his voice. 5 seconds to impact. They're charging up a heavier blast. "Full power to the engines," Hayes ordered, her voice steely. "Move us in close." Docking bay in sight. The Endurance lurched forward, flying toward the docking bay at breakneck speed. A massive blast hit the ship's shields, causing the whole vessel to shudder, but Hayes held on. They were so close, she could almost feel the cold metal of the station against their hull. "Docking, engage," Ryan announced, his voice filled with relief. The Endurance had successfully attached to the station, and the ship's shaking subsided. "Get ready, everyone," Hayes said, her voice firm. "We have no idea what we're walking into, but we need to move fast." The airlock hissed open, and the team, armed and ready, stepped into the Zorath station. The surroundings were cold and clinical, the walls adorned with dark, imposing technology. The atmosphere felt oppressive, like a shadow hung over everything. The silence was deafening. "Stay close," Hayes instructed, leading the way down the narrow hallways. "We're here to gather intel and neutralize their operations. Don't engage unless necessary." The group moved forward cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As they reached the first set of security doors, Hayes' pulse quickened. She could sense the danger ahead. Every moment spent on this station felt like time stolen from the krill. They couldn't afford to waste it. A sudden alarm blared, followed by the unmistakable sound of Zorath soldiers' boots running toward them. Hayes gritted her teeth. She had hoped to avoid a direct confrontation, but it was clear that the Zorath weren't going to let them leave peacefully. "Contact. Get ready," Ryan shouted, as a group of heavily armed Zorath soldiers appeared around the corner. They were tall and imposing, their faces obscured by armored masks, their weapons drawn and aimed. The humans opened fire first, taking advantage of the element of surprise. The Zorath soldiers retaliated quickly, their weapons sending bright flashes of energy across the hall. But Hayes' team was trained for this. The fight was intense, but quick. The Zorath soldiers, despite their superior technology, weren't prepared for the ferocity of the human soldiers. Within moments, the hallway fell silent again. "Clear," Ryan called out, his voice steady despite the tension. Hayes didn't waste a second. "We keep moving. We don't have time to waste on them." They continued deeper into the station, passing through several levels, each one more oppressive than the last. Finally, they arrived at what looked like a command center. The doors opened with a hiss, revealing a massive room filled with monitors, control panels, and rows of consoles. The air smelled sterile, almost lifeless. At the far end of the room, a tall figure stood with his back to them. He turned slowly, revealing the face of the Zorath leader, a man named Joreth. His cold eyes met Hayes with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "So the humans think they can stop us," Joreth said, his voice low and menacing. "You're too late. The Krill were never meant to survive. They were a test, a stepping stone towards something much greater. And now you've played right into our hands." Hayes felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about?" Joreth stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "The Krill were part of an experiment, a biological manipulation to create the perfect race, a race that could evolve into the ultimate weapon. But they failed. And now, with their destruction, we can move forward with our plans. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Hayes's mind raced. The Zorath weren't just trying to kill the Krill. They were trying to use them to create something far more dangerous. The Krill's downfall wasn't just a side effect. It was part of a much darker plan. "You won't get away with this," Hayes said, her voice steady. "We're stopping you now." Joreth laughed, the sound echoing in the room. "You can try, but it's already too late. The virus is in the air. The Krill will die, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." But Hayes's eyes burned with determination. She hadn't come this far to give up. "We'll see about that." The confrontation had only just begun. The atmosphere in the Zorath Command Center was thick with tension. Captain Hayes stood tall, her eyes locked onto Joreth, the leader of the Zorath Collective. His cold smile never faltered as he looked at her with amusement, knowing that his plans were about to come to fruition. "You're too late," Joreth said, his voice calm but full of arrogance. "The Krill will fall, and with them, any hope you have of saving them. There's nothing you can do." Hayes clenched her fists, her anger burning beneath the surface. She had fought too hard to let this monster destroy everything she had worked for. "You're wrong," she said, her voice unwavering. "We're not backing down. You'll answer for what you've done." Joreth's smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression of annoyance. "You think you can stop us? The virus is already in the air, spreading through the atmosphere. You can't stop it now. Your people are too small, too weak." Hayes didn't flinch. "We don't give up, and we don't quit, no matter how impossible things seem. We're here to put an end to your plans." Before Joreth could respond, Lieutenant Ryan and the rest of the crew moved into position, ready for the final battle. The Zorath soldiers, who had been hiding in the shadows, stepped out, their weapons raised. But Hayes wasn't intimidated. She could feel the determination of her team radiating through her. "We've been fighting for something bigger than ourselves," Hayes continued, her eyes narrowing. "And we'll stop you, no matter what it takes." Joreth's eyes flickered with something resembling frustration. "You're fools. You can't possibly understand the power we've harnessed. The Krill were a test run. And now that they've failed, we'll move forward with something even more dangerous." Hayes's heart pounded. It was clear now that the Zorath didn't just want to wipe out the Krill. They were preparing to use the knowledge they had gained from them to create something far worse. "Tell me what you're planning," Hayes demanded, her voice fierce. "What exactly were the Krill meant to become?" Joreth looked at her for a moment, then let out a low laugh. "Why not? You deserve to know your defeat in full. The Krill were designed to be the foundation for the perfect soldier. Through their genetic manipulation, we created a race capable of surviving any environment, adapting to any threat. The virus was just the beginning. Once they're gone, we'll have perfected the formula. And then, we'll build an army like the galaxy has never seen." Hayes's blood ran cold. The Zorath weren't just creating weapons, they were creating an unstoppable force that could threaten the entire galaxy. And now, with the Krill on the brink of extinction, they were moving forward with their twisted plan. "Not if I can help it," Hayes said, her voice filled with resolve. "We're stopping you here and now." Without warning, the team opened fire, aiming their weapons at the Zoreth soldiers who had been positioned throughout the room. The battle erupted in a flurry of movement, bright flashes of light illuminating the dark corners of the command center. Joreth raised his hand, and the remaining Zoreth soldiers began to activate a series of shields, making it more difficult for Hayes' team to advance. The soldiers fought back fiercely, but Hayes and her crew were determined. They knew that if they didn't end this here, the Krill and the galaxy were lost. "Keep pushing forward," Hayes shouted, leading the charge. The sound of blaster fire rang through the room as her team moved with precision, taking out the Zoreth soldiers one by one. Rian, a sharpshooter at heart, cleared a path toward the control panel, where Joreth stood watching the battle unfold with a cruel smile. But Hayes wasn't about to let him escape. She pushed forward, moving faster than she ever had before. With one final push, Hayes reached Joreth, knocking his guards aside. The two locked eyes, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Joreth's arrogance had vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You're too late. The virus is already beyond your control. The Krill are done." Hayes didn't hesitate. "You're wrong," she said, her voice calm but full of conviction. "We've already got the cure, and we're stopping you from creating your army. This ends now." Before Joreth could react, Ryan disabled the control panel, cutting off the Zoreth's access to the virus's spread. The room was flooded with alarms, signaling the shutdown of the system. The Krill were saved, their fate no longer in the hands of the Zoreth. Joreth's face twisted with rage. "This is not over. You can't stop what's coming." Hayes stood her ground, her resolve unshaken. "It's over, Joreth. You've lost." With the virus halted and the control panel disabled, the Zoreth Collective's plans had been foiled. The cure that Dr. Green had worked tirelessly on was now ready to be deployed, and the Krill's survival was assured. As the crew began to secure the station, Hayes took one last look at Joreth. He had been defeated, but Hayes knew that the threat he represented wasn't gone forever. There would always be those who sought to use others for power, but now they had a chance to fight back. The journey wasn't over, but the mission had been a success. The Krill were saved, the Zoreth's plans were destroyed, and humanity had once again proven that no matter the odds, they would rise to the challenge. As Endurance made its way back to Krillon, Hayes couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, and abandoned by the galaxy, but they had refused to give up. The humans had saved the Krill, and in doing so, had shown that no force in the galaxy could stand in their way. The fight was far from over, but humanity had made its mark, and the Zoreth Collective would think twice before underestimating them again.